So if the planet's movement is in any way symbolic of the times to come, then Mercury going retrograde right at the beginning of 2022 has got to be a good omen then, right? Right? Okay, maybe this Mercury retrograde might be a little bit of a doozy. So my job in this video is to not only explain to you guys what a Mercury retrograde is, all the specifics of this Mercury retrograde, and if you stick to the end, I'm going to be going over how it's going to be affecting your sign. But I also have to find a silver lining and create a positive spin on this. So my job is going to be very difficult today. So for those that are very new to astrology, and this is your first Mercury retrograde, let me go over some quick basics with you real fast. First things first, Mercury is going to rule over things like communication and messages. This is why Mercury retrogrades are often so associated with miscommunications, because Mercury rules over communications. Mercury rules things like ideas and your thoughts and your rationale. And this is really important because this is in contrast to, what your beliefs are or your imagination. That's not Mercury. Mercury is much more of simple ideas, simple thoughts. Mercury is a very organized planet and is a very literate planet. Mercury focuses on being clear, being punctual. Mercury focuses on the micro. Now, I put that in there to kind of emphasize the microcosm that Mercury really focuses on. It really focuses on the details and the things that are much smaller, because Mercury is a small planet, right? Mercury also rules over things like technology and logistics and shipping. Now, Uranus can technically also rule technology too, so don't get offended, but Mercury is more of the main significator of technology, as well as logistics, shipping. Mercury is the messenger. Now, a retrograde, every planet, here's the thing. Every planet goes retrograde, and each planet has its own signification. So when that planet goes retrograde, it has its own significations. Each retrograde is very specific to its planet. However, a Mercury retrograde, is a little bit different. The one thing I want to say is a retrograde is when a planet moves backwards in the zodiac, going over the same spot in the sky a few different times. Mercury retrogrades are often associated with times to redo things or to rethink things or to replan things. Now, typically, Mercury doesn't go retrograde and you go, maybe this is a good time to replan something. It's usually the universe throws something at you and you go, maybe I should replan now. Mercury retrogrades oftentimes just represent delays. There are people out there that truly think that every Mercury retrograde is the end of the world, and they will tell you that everything in your life is going to end, and they're wrong. Oftentimes in astrology, we can really blow up the meaning of something and get way too fixated on it. And oftentimes that's what a Mercury retrograde is. Mercury is known as being the trickster and playing games. So it's easy to kind of get a little bit fooled by Mercury. However, Mercury retrogrades oftentimes just represent delays, something not going as fast as you maybe wanted it to. Not that that's, the worst thing in the world, but it's a little bit of a problem. However, Mercury retrogrades aren't always the biggest issues. So what are Mercury retrogrades good for? Now, for me specifically, I like using this analogy because it's more specific to like my life and what I do, but editing, restructuring, rough drafts. Like if you're trying to do something permanent, maybe not the best idea for a Mercury retrograde. A Mercury retrograde is better of trying something new, doing something that you haven't done before, kind of taking a risk almost. That's why I put editing, restructuring, doing rough drafts, because you're going to be going over things multiple times, just like you would doing an edit or doing a rough draft. Mercury retrogrades are also good for reflecting and rethinking and re-strategizing, like I said. So again, if you're kind of fixated on something looking a certain way or being a certain way, you might have a hard time during a Mercury retrograde. Whereas if you're more open-minded to maybe changing something or looking at a different perspective, Mercury retrogrades offer safe havens for that type of mindset. Changing your mind, seeing a different perspective. Now, I put this because, yes, you should be doing that. However, the universe is going to give you a reason to do that. Like, you might be kind of forced into a situation during a Mercury retrograde where you kind of have to go out of your mind and you kind of have to see things through a different perspective. Mercury retrogrades are also great for being patient. Remember how I said Mercury retrogrades can often represent delays? Well, when things are delayed, when things aren't going your way, and things aren't going as planned, what does that do to you, right? Like, there's nothing that you can really do to fix or change everything in your universe. The best thing that you can do is learn patience and be okay with things taking some time. That's the whole, astrology just makes us okay with the current times, right? Learn some lessons, kind of question yourself a little bit and make sure that you don't, again, if you're trying to make extremely permanent plans and they fail, maybe learn that lesson. Don't do that during a Mercury retrograde. Now, I will also say this too. Mercury retrogrades often symbolize what we're doing. Not that that's always bad. For example, Mercury might be retrograding in your fourth house and you might be ready to buy a house and you might go, uh-oh, should I not buy a house because Mercury is retrograde? And that's not always the case. Oftentimes, Mercury going retrograde in your fourth house can just symbolize the time in which you find a house, put an offer in, go through escrow. That would be like the Mercury retrograde point, and then Mercury would station direct, and that's maybe when you move in. It's all a cycle, and oftentimes astrology just symbolizes what you're doing, and it's not necessarily, oh, something bad's going to happen or something good's going to happen, but it could just represent a delay. So what are Mercury retrogrades bad for? Mercury retrogrades are bad for expecting things to go exactly as you planned. I mean, how old are we here? Stop expecting things to go exactly as planned. You have to be open to change. You have to be able to call audibles, and that's Mercury retrograde, right? Saying something or planning something without thinking, this is when you kind of just say something off the cuff. This may be not really good for Mercury retrograde because what you say will be a little bit more impactful. And that's because Mercury retrogrades are bad for clear communication. If you are betting on clear communication, if you absolutely need that, you can't expect that. So again, if you're just going to say things willy-nilly, it's not really going to be picked up clear. It's not really going to be translated well. So you might kind of throw some fuel on the fire. Now, Mercury retrogrades are also bad for reacting and thinking that things are permanent. I cannot tell you how many clients I have who will, it's like Mercury will go retrograde and they go, uh-oh, it's the end of the world. What am I going to do now? You might have something that changes for you, but within that process of the Mercury retrograde, a solution's going to find itself, or at least you'll find a solution. Thinking that, let's say you're going to go do something and then that stops or that changes because Mercury's retrograde. Some people think that's permanent, as if there's not a second option or if there isn't a way to get around it. That's not true. You can't react into moments. You have to respond, right? You're not supposed to just be willy-nilly all up in your emotions and just kind of reacting to whatever the universe gives you. You have to respond. Things aren't going to be permanent. So if something, for example, during a Mercury retrograde, a classic Mercury retrograde thing is your phone breaking. Just because your phone broke doesn't mean it's going to be broke forever. You're going to send it in and eventually get a new one. Or, maybe you go to the store and get a new one. The idea is it's just a delay. It's just a road bump. They're not permanent, so don't trip about it. So now that we know the basics of a Mercury retrograde, let's talk a little bit more about the logistics of this one. Now, everyone knows, or at least you should know by this point, that Mercury retrogrades have about 5 phases. That's the shadow phase, the retrograde phase, the Cazimi phase, the direct phase / transiting shadow phase, and then once Mercury leaves shadow. Now, I'm going to go over what this is going to look like this time around. Now, this is not an accurate depiction of what you're going to see when you go outside. Oftentimes, it's really hard to see Mercury. You're more than likely not going to see Mercury unless you're really, really looking for it. But this is just going to be an animation to help it make a little bit more sense. Now, I got the other planets involved in this one too now, because the big thing with this Mercury retrograde is it's retrograding in that same area where Saturn is, Venus is. There's a lot going on in Capricorn and Aquarius, so I wanted to highlight the other planets that are there. But anyway, we start this Mercury retrograde as Mercury enters shadow on December 29th, 2021. This is at 24 degrees Capricorn. And now, if you're not familiar with shadow, what shadow means is Mercury's going to come right back to this spot in the sky. And Mercury, where it goes through from here, it will come back again. So essentially, Mercury's going to go retrograde right here. It'll fly forward, hit that point, and come backwards. So it fills up this whole space in the sky that we call shadow. That starts on December 29th, 2021. Mercury's going to enter shadow by conjoining a retrograde Venus and Pluto as well. So these are really, really big deals. Mercury will then go forward, and then on January 14th, 2022, Mercury will station retrograde at 10 degrees Aquarius. Now, due to my lack of animation skills, I wouldn't be able to actually put this in there, so we're going to play with some charts here in a second. But what's really important about this Mercury retrograde is that it's exactly squaring Uranus. Again, I couldn't put that in there because I couldn't animate that. That would be too much. But anyway, Mercury's going to be stationing retrograde exactly square Uranus. This is a really, really big deal. This isn't just your typical normal Mercury retrograde, but that happens on January 14th. Mercury will start to move backwards, and then we get to about our half point or our halfway point of the Mercury retrograde, and this is what we call the Mercury Cazimi. This is when Mercury conjoins the sun at 3 degrees Aquarius. Now, again, this is an accurate depiction, so if this looks confusing, or maybe it looks helpful, I don't know, I'm trying to get a different perspective here, but anyway, Mercury will go backwards and then conjoin the sun at 3 degrees Aquarius. This is the halfway point of the Mercury retrograde. This is happening on January 23rd. Then after that, Mercury will continue to go retrograde, go back into Capricorn, and then on February 4th of 2022, Mercury will station direct, pretty much again right on top of Pluto. This is in the middle of Aquarius season. I believe this is the Sun-Saturn Cazimi too, and I believe they're both at the same degree as well. Venus, notice that retrograde symbol is no longer on her. Venus is now direct at this point. So Mercury's direct, Venus is direct. All of the planets are flying forward. Then Mercury will start to move forward again. And by the time we get to somewhere in the middle of Pisces season on February 24th, 2022, Mercury will leave shadow and it is done with this part of the sky. That means Mercury will hit 10 degrees Aquarius, and we're pretty much done with the Mercury retrograde by that point. So let's actually start talking about how this Mercury retrograde is going to look. And of course, we start every Mercury retrograde off with the shadow phase. Now, what's important about a planet entering shadow, or more specifically, Mercury entering shadow, is this is where you're going to see the Mercury themes arise. This isn't when you see the retrograde undoing things happen, but this is where the context starts to set in. This is where you want to start paying attention to the conversations that you have, or the people that you speak to, or any tech things that you're thinking of doing, because Mercury's going to come right back to this point in the sky, so you are as well. Mercury enters shadow by conjoining retrograde Venus and Pluto as well. Now, if you haven't already seen my Venus retrograde video, I really highly recommend checking it out because I really talk about this Venus retrograde at length. And the big idea with the Venus retrograde is that this is a time of our value shifting, the way that we, pretty much do things in terms of what we want, what we enjoy, and the rules that we play by. Something I've talked a lot about on my channel as well as in that Venus retrograde video is the fact that Venus is on top of Pluto, and Pluto rules things like fear and power. Now, while Venus is retrograding on top of Pluto right here in the middle of this, Venus rules like values and fun, and being retrograde in Pluto and Capricorn, that sounds like a lot of not fun, right? That seems like a lot of intense emotions. Well, Mercury conjoining Venus and Pluto, adding into the mix, I don't necessarily think is going to help when it comes to not feeling anxious or not being in fear. Mercury conjoining Venus and Pluto, I think, is our mind is really focused on this area. Our thoughts are really focused on this area. And I think this is where we kind of come to terms that we're changing. Venus is already retrograde at this point. And oftentimes you can kind of initiate a change in your life subconsciously, or maybe you can shift a value in your life subconsciously. And then it's not until a little bit later on where something hits you and it clicks and you go, wow, I am changing. Wow, I don't feel that way anymore. That seems to be what December 29th is, when Mercury conjoins Venus and Pluto, where you kind of realize, hey, maybe I do want to change things up a little bit, or maybe this is how I'm shifting things. Mercury conjoining Venus, conjoining Pluto too, is there's a lot of, Mercury can often represent a microphone or a way to communicate things, right? And it's communicating that Pluto-Venus retrograde message. There is this kind of fear. There is this confusion of what's going to happen. I'm not really sure. So there is this kind of intense moment here. But for other people, Pluto is very powerful. And I think this is definitely realizing what needs to change in your life and seeing it at its real core. Now, let's actually pull this up on an actual chart. So if you were to look at, a chart, this is essentially what you're going to see. Mercury is conjoining Venus and Pluto here. As you can see, Venus is retrograde. That's why she's red, 24, 25. So this is how Mercury enters shadow. Now, once Mercury enters shadow, again, this is where all the Mercury retrograde themes are going to come into play. Now, in between Mercury conjoining Venus and Pluto on December 29th, it's like, whoa, we kind of realize what needs to change. I think that's a very powerful way to go into the new year. The other thing to say about Mercury entering shadow is Mercury doesn't typically hit a planet when it enters shadow, like conjoin a planet, nor does it typically conjoin a retrograde Venus and Pluto. This is kind of I don't want to say very rare, but it's very unique, and it's definitely something to pay attention to. So Mercury enters shadow by conjoining Venus and Pluto. There's this realization of what's going on. And then as we go into the new year, a little bit after the new year starts, Mercury will then enter Aquarius, where it'll actually go retrograde. Now, Mercury, again, the way that we communicate, the way that we message, the way that we think, it was in Capricorn, where it's like, man, we have a plan, we have a system, we have a way of doing things. Mercury in Capricorn is very ambitious, it's very cut, it's very dry. Then as we get into the new year, Mercury is going to enter Aquarius, where there's a big difference. Mercury has triplicity in Aquarius. There is this comfortability that Mercury has in air signs. Mercury rules ideas and thoughts and intellect, and so do air signs. Now, Mercury going into Saturn's home of Aquarius is definitely focusing on the Aquarian stuff, right? Communities, groups of people, the spirit of the law, how systems of society should function, right? Infrastructure. Mercury going into Aquarius is Mercury, our mindset, what we're thinking about, what we're focused on, is going into a fixed sign. Fixed signs keep things the same. And Mercury in Aquarius is like, this is the way it is. Mercury in Aquarius is, Aquarius is often associated with a different perspective, or looking things outside of the box, or technology and doing things, different, because it's the sign of outcasting and alienating, right? I think as Mercury goes through Aquarius, there is this sense of our mind kind of maybe, again, going out of our heads, looking at things through a different perspective, but maybe feeling stuck in that way, or maybe feeling stuck in our mindset. Saturn rules limitations and responsibilities and weight, right? And as Mercury's in Saturn's sign, maybe there's this intellectual heaviness, or this rational heaviness that Mercury's experiencing as it goes into Aquarius. So this is between, I believe, the 3rd and the 4th Mercury enters Aquarius. And Mercury will continue to transit Aquarius, continuing its shadow phase until it stations retrograde on January 14th of 2022. Now, again, this is such an intense way to start the new year. I truly think that this is going to be like the worst Mercury retrograde of 2022. Not only is it conjoining Venus and Pluto as it enters shadow, but it stations retrograde squaring Uranus, which is a pretty big deal. But let's talk about Mercury just stationing retrograde. As Mercury was moving forward, hits that point where it starts to move back, this is where you kind of realize what's changing. While Mercury was in shadow, you might be thinking things are going to go a certain way. You might be thinking plans are going to hit. Or while Mercury hits shadow, it's like, okay, you know what's going to be changing. You know what conversations are going to be had. Maybe when Mercury enters shadow, it's like the thing happens that you go, okay, we're going to come back to that in a few weeks. As Mercury hits retrograde, that's when things change. That's when you go, all right, now it's time to address this. Now it's time to actually figure it out. The thing is with Mercury retrograde, though, is oftentimes what you're anticipating or what you're planning might be wrong. Not that it's bad, but you have to be open-minded with what the outcomes will be, because Mercury retrogrades will surprise you. So as Mercury stations retrograde, this is the time where you go, okay, this is what's changing. Okay, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. But you kind of realize that, okay, it's time to shift your perspective. It's time to change the plans because, there's news, there's a message. Mercury is the messenger. So Mercury stationing retrograde is definitely getting a message of something, right? The big thing, though, is when we look at the chart aspect of this, and Mercury actually moves backwards. Okay, there it goes. It's just moving slowly. Mercury, 10 degrees Aquarius, right, is going to be squaring Uranus, which is a pretty big deal. Let's actually switch it to this perspective because I want to show you guys how big of a deal this is. Mercury will come up and slow down and then tink, hit Uranus exactly at 10 degrees Aquarius and Uranus. At 10 degrees Aquarius and Taurus. Here's the thing. Uranus rules ups and downs. You could say explosions. Uranus can also rule technology. I look at Uranus as much more about liberation. Uranus is the unexpected. Uranus is very unstable. And that's not always bad. Uranus is a risk taker, right? And sometimes when you risk things, you can lose them. But when you risk things, you can also win them. I'm a big fan of Richard Tarnas, and in his third book, it's like his only second astrology book, Prometheus the Awakener. He really argues that Uranus is much more about much more closely related to the mythology around Prometheus, which the mythology of Prometheus is about stealing the fire from the gods to free the slaves of the people. So again, random sudden thing that really kind of breaks up the hinges of the order. I truly believe that Uranus is, opposite authority, breaking things up. And it is about liberation. It is about freedom. It is about this sense of radical independence almost, I would feel like. But as Uranus has been in Taurus, Uranus also rules inventions, right? And it's been in Taurus, the sign of the earth, right? Value, food, nourishment, stability. And I think that's so important about Taurus, because Taurus is like the sign of stability and groundedness. And as Uranus is the sign of instability, you can see how that can create some problems. But Mercury is going to be stationing retrograde exactly square it. Now, squares aren't always bad, okay? They are bad, but not always. This one might be a little bad, okay? But Mercury being in Aquarius, where we're, wanting to communicate a message in a fixed in a certain way, in a very Saturnian way. It's like, this is the way it has to be. And Mercury in Aquarius might be more concerned about maybe like the spirit of the law than the letter of the law, or vice versa, right? And you could see how maybe that could be a conundrum. Aquarius is a very divided sign, and Saturn's been in Aquarius, and we've been a little divided lately. Mercury, I believe, in Aquarius might kind of exacerbate that, and Mercury in Aquarius is going to be thinking on, in terms of partisan lines is a good way to put it. It's either going to be on one side or the other. Oftentimes, Aquarius, it can be difficult to be in the middle on something. But as Mercury's in Aquarius, and where our mindset is focused on this rigid Saturnian way of looking at things, it's going to square Uranus. Expect the unexpected. Expect something, a message, an incoming alert that is very sudden, that is very dramatic. It is very unexpected. Mercury squaring Uranus, your ideas. You might have a breakthrough moment here. This is all to say, as Mercury squares Uranus, there's definitely something is not bending, it is breaking. And Mercury rules things like communication and technology. This looks like, a lot of you are going to have really bad tech issues. Some of you are going to pop off on some people accidentally, and it's going to throw a wrench in everyone's plans. But let's go back to January 14th. Mercury stations retrograde and begins to move forward. This is where the retrograde themes begin. What are you going to rethink? What are you going to re-strategize? Where are you changing your perspective? Because Mercury in Aquarius doesn't want to change its mind, but as it squares Uranus, you might have to. So Mercury is going to station retrograde, and it's going to slowly move backwards. And this is that time again where we reflect, we're rethinking everything. And then that's when we get to January 23rd, 2022. And that's when we have the Mercury Cazimi. This is what's considered the halfway point, and that's because this is when Mercury conjoins the sun. Or in this image, for example, they line up. Now, this is happening at 3 degrees Aquarius. This one is a really big deal. Mercury retrograde symbolize the halfway points, right? But what a Mercury Cazimi is pretty much that point within the Mercury retrograde where, like, that light bulb moment where you go, oh, this is the solution. Oh, this is what I did wrong. Oh, that's what happened. There's a lot of clarity here. The problem with this Mercury retrograde in Aquarius, or I should say this Cazimi, is realizing things isn't always good. Kind of like if you have a check engine light in your car and you try and you try and you try, and then you finally figure out what the problem is. You go, uh-oh. Not, a little bit bigger of a problem than maybe you expected, but January 23rd is where we get that sense of clarity. And again, this is in Aquarius. This is the sign of, rigid ideas and fixed ideas, a fixed sense of thinking. And Mercury's going to really, I think, struggle adapting or changing when it comes to what it might have to change its mind about. Then after we get done with the Mercury Cazimi and you realize what your problems are, you realize what the solution is, you realize what you did wrong and what you need to change, Mercury will continue to move backwards. Oh, whoops, wrong slide. This slide, I wanted to show you the visual of the Mercury Cazimi in case looking at charts is new for you. Something I also wanted to bring up is around the time that Mercury's Cazimi and we're kind of getting all of this flood of ideas and everything's kind of hitting us, Venus is getting really close to stationing direct. And by the time Mercury's direct, she'll be direct. But and Mars is about ready to move into Capricorn too. So there's quite a few things that happen around when this Mercury Cazimi. So as we're kind of getting this clarity of thought, Venus is slowing down, Mars is about to ingress, right? But that leads us to when Mercury actually goes back into Capricorn and goes over Pluto again and stations direct. So from about that February 23rd to about, 12 days into February 4th, that's when Mercury will station direct. In between that time, Mercury will retrograde and go back into Capricorn. This is where, if Mercury in Aquarius is like a fixed way of looking at things, Mercury in Capricorn is going over that plan again, going over that structure and strategizing is a good way to look at it. And as Mercury goes backwards into Capricorn, it's also going to conjoin Pluto. And I think Pluto here, I think this is the big thing with this one. I think as Mercury hits Pluto, and this is going to be over the period of the beginning few days of February. Pluto rules power and Pluto rules fear. And as Mercury is retrograde on top of Pluto, there's two questions. What did you do because you were scared, or what did you do because you weren't scared? Mercury retrograde on Pluto, again, I've said this a few times in my weekly horoscopes of it's oftentimes when you face a fear, you realize how small and insignificant it was, and you realize how powerful you are. That's what I think a lot of this Mercury retrograde is that's mentally clicking. It's not about feeling, it's about understanding that. And I think as Mercury stations direct on Pluto, you got one or two choices here. It's either step up to the plate or hide in fear. Pluto is power. So I would also assume that Mercury retrograding over Pluto is realizing what power dynamics are involved in your situation. Sometimes it's hard to speak up about something because of a power dynamic at play. Sometimes it's hard to do something because of, again, power dynamics. And that's what Pluto is going to also do. And I think as Mercury comes back and is retrograde over Pluto, we're rethinking, we're re-understanding our ideas of power and fear and how we let that dictate what we say, what we do, what we think. And I think as Mercury stations direct on Pluto, there is this sense of acceptance, right? That's what a Mercury stationing direct is like, okay, now that we have worked everything out, now that you did your one thing and then it got messed up, you realized what your problem is, Mercury stations direct, and now you get to go about all of this again. So I think to kind of rewind here, as Mercury enters shadow, conjoining Pluto, you might do something out of fear, right? Venus retrograde, Pluto might go, I don't like this, and this has tripped me out. I can't do it. Mercury's going to go into Aquarius and square Uranus. Whatever you thought you were going to do ends up changing. Mercury comes back into Pluto, and you go, okay, maybe I shouldn't be scared. Maybe I should do that anyway. Or Mercury's going to be conjoining Pluto, and maybe you guys are on a power trip, and you're like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And then Mercury goes into Aquarius, stations retrograde squaring Uranus. That doesn't work. And Mercury comes back over to Pluto and you kind of maybe humble yourself a little bit and go, okay, let's do this a little bit differently. Once we get to February 4th, 2022, Mercury's going to come back over this part of the sky again for the third time. So we get to do all of this over again. Isn't that exciting to do things over again? Mercury will be conjoining Pluto again. Now, that will be a little intense. There's a lot of planets on top of Pluto, but I want to bring to your attention, Venus is no longer retrograde. Venus is now direct. So like in my Venus retrograde, I talked about where we have our values are shifting. And I think at this point, we're really kind of accepting maybe what we want. We're going more after what we want. We have that plan. It's worked out and it's kind of going for us. I just think Mercury conjoining Pluto is maybe realizing what power you kind of have to take on in order to kind of move forward. And again, Mercury stations direct. I wanted to show you what this looks like here again on the chart, because what's important is look how much is in Capricorn. Mercury, Pluto, Venus, Mars. This is going to be activating whatever Capricorn rules in your chart, whatever house it rules in your chart. And when I say activating, I mean lighting up. There's a lot of planets here. There's a lot of energy going on in this Capricorn, but it's all direct energy, meaning things are moving forward. Things are feeling clear. You might fuck up, but that's okay because you figure it out at this point and you know what needs to change. So Mercury will station direct, right? And then we get to go and do all of that over again, but this time maybe with the better idea. Mercury will move forward, and then it's about somewhere in the middle of Pisces season at about February 24th when Mercury leaves shadow. This is when we're all done with the Mercury retrograde stuff, right? This time, I wanted to point to your attention, Mars and Venus are exactly conjoining each other flying through Capricorn. So the thing is, whatever Mercury was kind of doing over here, Mars and Venus are also going to go over this part of the sky too. And they're really going to energize all of the things that was going on here, right? So that's really good. That's a good thing. I'm bringing this up because whatever you're kind of mentally focused on in January and February, that's fine. You'll be mentally focused on it. But once you move forward from there, there's still more stuff to do there. Mercury is much more mental versus Mars and Venus is much more, creative and magnetic, and Mars is much more like action oriented. So, you might have a plan, and Mercury stationing direct in Capricorn is like you get a plan together and then your mind's off on other things. But then Mars and Venus is like taking action on those plans and actually following through with those plans. So again, Mercury will leave shadow. This in the middle of Pisces season. Mars and Venus will continue to move forward, and we're pretty much done with the Mercury retrograde. However, at this point, once Mercury leaves shadow, it will hit Uranus again. So there will be another unexpected bump in the road, and you're going to have to be flexible. You're going to have to change. There are always going to be some type of problem. There's always going to be some type of problem in the astrology, so nothing's ever perfect. Again, to show you what this kind of looks like in the chart, Mars and Venus, just them by themselves in Capricorn, conjoining Pluto, so things are getting pretty intense over here. Mercury still flying forward, still going to make that square to Uranus, though. So it's kind of like you might have a wrench that gets thrown in your plans when Mercury stations retrograde, and then like Mercury's going to go back into Capricorn, and you're going to try to figure it all out, and then Mercury's going to go direct again, and it's going to hit Uranus again, where you just can't, for example, you might have a check engine light on and then you ignore it, but then you finally take it into the mechanic and then you think everything's fine. And then it's like, all of a sudden you get a flat tire. Like that's very Mercury coming back and squaring Uranus again after it leaves shadow. So again, you just have to expect the unexpected. And this is why I said in the beginning, you have to be patient. You have to be patient. You have to learn lessons. Keep your cool and don't lose your head. So now that we know all about the Mercury retrograde, let's actually start talking about how it's going to be affecting your zodiac sign. This is for your rising sign. I typically don't say that because everyone gets really mad at me when I say to watch this from your rising sign. People are like, but I want to watch it from my moon. I want to watch it from my sun. I don't care what zodiac sign you want to watch from, honestly. But I write these from the rising sign, like most astrologers do, even though people fight with me with that in the comments every video I make. This is for your rising sign. This is my horoscope. This is what I say goes. So if you want to fight with that, watch someone else's video. Anyway, Aries. We are starting this year off, again, with the Mercury retrograde, but this Mercury retrograde is happening. Let's zoom out a little bit so you can see it. This Mercury retrograde is happening in your 11th house of friendships, networks, and communities, where Saturn's at, right? And Mercury is going to be squaring Uranus, exactly. And Uranus is in your second house of money, finances, and resources. So I would expect either a friend borrowing something or some type of money issue, possession issue when it comes to friends. I'm not sure how that might look, but maybe you're expecting borrowing something from a friend or a friend's going to borrow something from you. Well, that's either they're going to break it or you're going to break it or something's going to happen. But then as we move to Mercury stationing direct, Mercury stations direct in your 10th house. So because Mercury does rule your 6th house of labor and work, this might be a change in your work and your job related to your friendships that's going on. So maybe you randomly quit a job with Mercury stationing square Uranus, and Mercury going back into your 10th house is, getting some type of different job. So that leads us to Taurus. Mercury is stationing retrograde in your 10th house. The 10th house rules career, public notoriety, how the world sees you. Mercury rules over your 2nd house of money and your 5th house of love and romance and sex and pleasure. As Mercury's in your 10th house of career, I'm assuming money topics will be at the focus, or creativity, perhaps even children. Mercury going retrograde at the 10th, in the 10th is probably either a delay in pay, or maybe you're expecting a bonus that will get delayed. There will be a miscommunication in your work. That is for sure. And Mercury is squaring Uranus in your 1st house. Uranus is in your 1st house. You're feeling a little, edgy, a little explosive. And I think Mercury retrograde in your 10th, squaring Uranus in your 1st is you might say something a little explosive and a little unstable, or vice versa. Someone says something very explosive and destabilizing to you. That leads to Mercury then stationing direct in your 9th house of spirituality, religion, far distance travel, where there seems to be getting a spiritual or mental grip on things in order to move forward. The 9th house also rules higher education, publishing, astrology. So I think maybe Mercury stationing direct up here is kind of getting a little bit of spiritual clarity about what to do with your life and what's kind of going on. So that brings us to Gemini. Gemini, Mercury is retrograding in your 9th house of spirituality, religion, far distance travel, astrology, teachers, publishing, social media. Mercury is your ruling planet. That's a really big deal. Mercury also rules your 4th house of home and family and living situation. Mercury retrograding in your 9th house, squaring Uranus in your 12th. The 12th house rules hidden enemies. If you are planning to go travel in a different country, wow, is this the wrong time to do that? That's all I could really say. Or if you're planning on moving to a different country, this is also a very bad time where you might have encounter a lot of issues. Mercury retrograding in your 9th house. You're probably going to publish something on social media that's, gets you in trouble. Or you might have a sudden breakthrough with something regarding religious topics, spirituality topics. I'm assuming it's going to be very sudden and very unexpected. Uranus is in your 12th. There's something about, what's the word I'm looking for? There's something about it that you're not seeing that I think will come out of your subconscious that might kind of spook you. And then Mercury, of course, stations direct in your 8th house. Now, the 8th house rules secrets and the occult and the taboo. So there seems to be maybe something that you didn't understand or that you didn't see that you become vividly clear of by February 4th that you might be a little bit intensely related to. Mercury does rule your 4th house of home and family, and this is in your 8th house of death and shared resources. So this could be involving moving and expenses when it comes to moving. I doubt this would involve like a death with a family member, but you will have some anxiety because the 8th house does bring anxiety about all this stuff. So then we get to Cancer. Mercury is going to be retrograding in your 8th house of shared resources, other people's money, inheritance, death, the occult, the secrets. Mercury rules over your 3rd house of communication and your 12th house of the subconscious and hidden enemies. So I think as Mercury's retrograding in your 8th, there's something secretive, there's something hidden that I don't think you're seeing happening, and it's squaring Uranus in your 11th house of friends. That's really shaking up your friendships. This could be about money since the 8th house rules shared resources. It could be about borrowing and lending things. Could deal with siblings since the 3rd house does rule siblings and short distance travel. But the 12th house rules hidden enemies, and I think Mercury retrograding in your 8th is possibly someone fucking you over, possibly a friend, and it's very unexpected. Mercury will then go back into your 7th house of individual relationships, where I think you might be clearing up whatever friendship things happen because this is a specific individual. The 7th house rules relationships and individuals, and Mercury stationing on Pluto is kind of like having a clearing conversation. Then we get to Leo. Mercury is going to be stationing retrograde in your 7th house of relationships. Mercury rules over your 2nd house of money and your 11th house of friendships. And Mercury is going to be squaring Uranus in your 10th house of career, public notoriety. This just honestly seems like a pretty big miscommunication with an individual friend. Maybe it's about money. Maybe it's about a shared possession or shared resources. This could be involving work stuff too. Uranus in your 10th house could be a lot of stuff, though. It could just be, things kind of popping off randomly. But I would assume it might be work related. That's also because Mercury will station direct in your 6th house. And the 6th house rules coworkers. The 6th house rules pets. The 6th house rules day-to-day routines, your health. And as Mercury stations direct here, ruling your 2nd house of money and your 11th house of friends, there's something that gets cleared up here that where it feels like something, whether it's your schedule that gets cleared up or you kind of handle your health or you're much more focused on your work, or coworkers where things really start to move forward. Then we get to Virgo. Virgo, Mercury is going to be stationing retrograde in your 6th house of coworkers, health, day-to-day activities, labor, pets too. Mercury rules your ascendant. This is a big deal for you, Mercury, for you Virgo risings, as well as it rules your 10th house of your career, what you do for work, your public legacy. Mercury's retrograding in your 6th. Guess who's quitting their job? You guys, or you're just going to have a delay in your work, a delay in your schedule. Uranus is in your 9th house of spirituality and religion and far distance travel. So I just think this is going to be a delay in your plans, honestly. And that brings us to, Mercury stationing direct in your 5th. I think some of you might quit your jobs because you just don't identify with it anymore. And this is much more about like, hey, what's fun for you? Not that you should just quit your job and live your best life and just do what's ever fun. That's not how life works. But this is asking the deeper question of what do you want and how do you incorporate that into your day-to-day life? So then we move to Libra. Mercury is going to be stationing retrograde in your 5th house of love, romance, sex, and pleasure. Mercury rules over your 12th house of hidden enemies and secrets, and it also rules your 9th house of spirituality, religion, social media, publishing, far distance travel. And as Mercury retrogrades in your fifth, the fifth house rules, again, love, romance, sex, recreation, vices, drugs, alcohol, children. So there seems to be a miscommunication maybe with kids, or maybe a rethinking or a re-strategizing of what you find fun for recreation. It's squaring Uranus in your 8th house, though, and Uranus rules the 8th house of inheritance, death, other people's money. So there seems to be something unexpected happening here that really shifts your mindset about creativity and pleasure. Then Mercury will station direct in your 4th house of home, family, living situation, where it seems like whatever changes in this 5th house gets cleared up by focusing on your home, your family, where you live, or moving. Then we get to Scorpio. So Scorpio, Mercury is stationing retrograde in your 4th house of home, family, and living situation. Mercury rules over your 11th house of friends, and it rules over your 8th house of shared resources, and it's going to be squaring Uranus in your 7th house of relationships. So Mercury retrograde in your 4th house is definitely a miscommunication in the home. And since Mercury rules the 11th house of friends and shared resources, this might have to do with parents or roommates if you have any, or any other individual in your home, but mostly also friends. Mercury is squaring Uranus in your 7th house. The 7th house rules every individual relationship you have, whether it's a partner or any individual, really. And this seems like a big miscommunication with a specific individual, or maybe you randomly move in with someone, or maybe someone randomly moves in with you. Maybe you randomly move out. There is a lot to kind of look at. A lot could really happen here, but it's going to be happening in your home and family involving someone else. Mercury will then station direct in your 3rd house of siblings, short distance travel, neighbors. So maybe you move very locally or very close by. That's probably what I would assume it is. Sagittarius, Mercury is retrograding in your 3rd house. The 3rd house rules siblings, neighbors, your schedule, communication, technology. Mercury rules over your 10th house of your career and your public reputation, as well as your 7th house of relationships of any individual. Mercury retrograde in your 3rd house is probably going to be a miscommunication with a neighbor or with a sibling or having tech issues. Uranus is in your 6th house of your schedule, your work, your day-to-day activities. So it seems like a miscommunication or a tech issue is really going to fuck up your schedule and really get in the way of a lot of things. But that's okay, because Mercury will station direct in your 2nd house of money and finances, where it seems like there seems to be money involved or a purchase involved or a possession involved, that once you get that straightened away, things can start to move forward again. And then we get to Capricorn. Mercury is going to be stationing retrograde in your 2nd house of money, finances, possessions, resources. Mercury rules over your 9th house of spirituality and religion and far distance travel and college and stuff like that. Mercury also rules over your 6th house of your work, your day-to-day activities, your routines, the labor that you do, health, as well as pets and coworkers. Mercury retrograding in your 2nd house, squaring Uranus in your 5th. Uranus, or the 5th house, rules love, romance, sex, pleasure, recreation. Seems like you might spend a little extra money on something, or you might have an unexpected expense come up. Maybe you have a little bit too much fun on a night out. But Mercury retrograding in your 2nd house is definitely a money issue, a work issue. And 9th house is going to be related to spirituality, religion, traveling. So maybe some money issues with traveling, with work, but that's okay. Mercury is going to station direct in your 1st house of yourself, whereas there's kind of this clarity of like what you need to do, and things start working out with your schedule and your routine. Mercury just going back into your 1st house is definitely just getting much more clarity on your role in all of this. Aquarius, Mercury is going to station retrograde in your 1st house, which is all about yourself, your identity, your body, your worldview, as well as just general life topics in general. Mercury rules over your 8th house of shared resources, other people's money, death, inheritance, the occult and secrets. Mercury also rules over your 5th house of love, romance, sex, pleasure, children, recreation, hobbies. Seems like you're going to be doing a pretty big miscommunication. Mercury's going to retrograde. It's squaring Uranus in your 4th. The 4th house rules home and family and living situation. Mercury's in your 1st. Seems like you're going to miscalculate something with home and family regarding you. This could involve shared resources and debt and other people's money. This could involve fun stuff too. Mercury's then going to go back into your 12th house, where I don't like this Mercury retrograde for you guys, to be honest with you. It just seems like you might, have some shit come up, but Mercury going back in your 12th house is like mentally clearing out fear. Like if you have subconscious fear that you need to get rid of, that would be the time to do it. And then last and not least, we get to Pisces. Now, Pisces, Mercury is going to be retrograding in your 12th house of hidden enemies, isolation, alienation, repressed, unacknowledged parts of yourself, healing, going away to be by yourself, right? It's what you don't see. It's a hidden area. But Mercury rules your 7th house of relationships and other individuals in your life, all individuals. And Mercury also rules your 4th house of home, family, living situation. Mercury retrograding in your 12th house, squaring Uranus in your 3rd. A lot of weird houses here, but this involves possibly a neighbor or a friend coming out, saying something maybe against you, or a miscommunication with someone that you're not even aware of, and you won't be aware of it until Mercury stations direct in your 11th house, where maybe that person reaches out to you and says, hey, this is what's up. Mercury retrograding in your 12th house, you may not necessarily see what happens at first, and it may take a while. And this also might involve a neighbor or something about a living situation, but it is definitely involving an individual, and you're probably not going to see it at first, but then that friend around February, well, you'll have that clearing conversation. So that's everything that's going on in this Mercury retrograde. I want to know what your guys' thoughts are below. Are you ready for it squaring Uranus? Are you ready for it stationing direct on top of Pluto? What are you looking forward to most? What are you least looking forward to? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts and opinions about all of this. If you like this video, please give me a like. It actually really does help me out in getting my videos out there. If you really like the graphic animations, and if you want to support me and learning how to do this to where I could provide better quality content to you guys, please consider becoming a patron over at my Patreon. It really does help me getting this type of good quality content out there to you guys. So I guess with that being said, thank you so much for being here, liking, sharing, commenting, subscribing. I love and appreciate every single one of you, and I'll be seeing you next time.